This episode is sponsored by StationWise, the first staffing software to be truly firefighter-proof. Now, you may be wondering why I have software as a sponsor when I focus usually on physical and mental health of the first responders, and I will tell you exactly why. For the first time, this is a staffing platform that also is able to integrate wellness information through call load tracking, exposures, and wearables integration. Now, of course, StationWise focuses on staffing and allows you to manage staffing, choose vacation picks, put in rules for leave and trades, and even deploying strike teams. But through the latest programming and AI automation, they have streamlined this process to free up battalion chiefs so they can focus on what they're supposed to be doing on the operational side and the fireground. Now, StationWise is also able to monitor not only how many calls we've responded to in a shift, but the duration of the call, therefore the rest and recovery in between, thus monitoring the sleep deprivation that degrades our health and performance. It's accessible not only through the computer, but also on Apple and Android devices, meaning that you can access it not only within the station itself, but outside as well. Now, one of the most powerful features of StationWise, in my opinion, is the ability to run reports. Therefore, for example, be able to see just how much money is being used on overtime that could actually be front-loaded for proactive staffing, as well as setting alarms knowing when you are hitting overtime parameters. And another important feature is the integration of other programs and software for payroll, training, reports, etc. Now, StationWise is trusted by numerous agencies in California, Texas, and Idaho. And if you want to hear the full story from the founder, who he himself is a son of a firefighter, listen to episode 1163 with Marcus Edwards. And if you want to book a demo or learn more, go to stationwise.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name is James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show 33-year fire service veteran and former training chief for Chicago Fire Department, Pete Van Dorpe. So in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from Pete's own journey into the fire service, the training and mental health conversations back then, the resistance to fire service innovation, his work with Underwriters Laboratory, some exciting technology that's coming to our profession, the recruitment crisis, moral injury, his wanderlust, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of almost 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Pete Van Dorpe. Enjoy. Pete, I want to start by saying two things. Firstly, thank you to our mutual friend Lionel Crowther for even making the introduction. Yes. We both presented in California about a year ago now. And secondly, I want to welcome you onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you. It's Lionel's a great guy, and he's one of the best friends I made in the fire service. And I retired with a capital R a couple of years ago, but I made an exception for Lionel. It really was an exception. I committed to doing something for him many years ago, and we never were able to put it together until just last year. So, and that's where we met with a couple other folks. It was a great time.
Absolutely. It's the same thing. I don't like doing public speaking normally. So when he asked me, and it was to do with Louis as well, I'm like, okay, well, how can we say no to those two amazing men?
Exactly. They're hard guys to say no to. Yeah, with all that they do. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, very first question, because this is an interesting kind of response to this. Firstly, where on planet Earth are we finding you today?
You're finding me in Westmont, which is a suburb of Chicago, west of Chicago.
And where will we be finding you in about 10 days' time?
In 10 days' time, you'll be finding me in Los Angeles. Briefly. You want me to go right into it, or you want to ask?
I do, yeah, because I think there's so much value in, post-service and adventure rather than, just watching the number of years count down and then playing golf till you die. So talk to me. I guess roll back a little bit. Talk to me about the traveling you do in your van, and then we'll get to the cruise.
Okay, so yeah, I met the love of my life about 3 years ago, and one of the things that attracted us to each other was our post-retirement plans were very similar, and we were talking about divesting ourselves of all of our burdensome possessions and traveling full time. And so that's what we do. We sold our houses and most of our possessions, and with a few exceptions, a very, very few exceptions, if it doesn't fit in our Sprinter van, we don't own it. And so we travel full time in a Sprinter van, of all things. And we're taking a break from that, if you will, come this month, and we're going to get on a cruise ship, and we're going to cruise around the world for 6 months. So we're everybody asks about how big our stateroom is. We say it's bigger than our van. So we'll be yeah. So that's what we'll be doing.
Which company are you sailing with?
Oceania.
Okay. Yeah, my sister worked on the QE2 back when that was the kind of flagship of Cunard, and they used to do the round. I think it was a 3-month trip with them, but I mean, just the destinations are amazing.
We took the longest one we could find. Actually, you could do several different, but we looked for two things: length of cruise and number of ports of call, right? Because a lot you can spend, and you do, no matter what you're doing. You got to cross the Pacific Ocean, so you're going to spend a lot of time on the water. Which can get a little dull, but so we're better than 50% at ports of call. So that's pretty good as these things go.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I absolutely love cruises. It's funny because when we were younger, cruises were seen as air quotes for old people. But then you get on one.
Here we are. Yeah. Where I am anyway.
Well, I'm not far behind, but then you get on and you realize that, well, what's so amazing about them? If you're a parent, there's all these things that your kids can do, and they can actually be, watched for several hours, so you can actually have some time. But the simple things that are, an irritant, and don't get me wrong, I'm fully aware this is first world problems, but, doing your laundry, doing, cooking, what am I going to eat today? I mean, all these things, cleaning, everything is done. So, and then if you choose not to get Wi-Fi, you're disconnected from the world. So I find it incredibly healing when we go onto a cruise from Florida here.
Yeah. Well, we've never been, either one of us, on a traditional cruise ship. So this is very much a both feet in, the first time around. And but we did the same thing with the traveling, right? Just get rid of everything and off we went. So she's a trooper. She puts up with all that.
What are some of the destinations you're most excited about?
Oh boy, I don't. Well, for me, it's not even so much a destination. I'm a seafaring fan, if you will. I like to read historical books about the age of sail and all that. So the whole idea of sailing around Cape Horn just fascinates the crap out of me. I just find that, it's certainly not going to be the experience that they had in the age of sail, but it'll be very similar. I mean, that to me is worth doing in and of itself. Australia, I've always wanted to see. The whole Southeast Asia, I never thought I'd get there. And then places like we're going to make some stops up in Iceland, in that area. So that I'm really looking forward to that too, because that's always been a bucket list destination for me. And really part of the attraction of all this is there's a lot of places that you would probably, because you're doing the whole thing in a sense, not literally, but close to it. A lot of places that you would put down, a third or fourth tier that you're going to make, So I find that's part of the appeal is that, you get to dip your toe in these places and see if you really want to go back and explore them. without a full commitment, to that one little part of the world. So.
Absolutely.
And the whole idea of being taken care of. I mean, living on the road is not exactly, it's not burdensome, but you never have the same bathroom, the same shower, the same, so and the whole, like you said, cooking and cleaning and all that is a little more of a chore than it is when you're living in a house someplace. So having that full service, being taken care of for 6 months, we're looking forward to that.
Yeah. No, I am extremely envious. When we do sail, I normally get the balcony room, and it's not anything other than whatever's going on, because obviously some of these ships, they've got a lot going on the upper decks.
Yeah.
You can just sit there with a cup of coffee and a book, and the ocean is just going right past your bedroom, and it's so healing to me. And so I can imagine, like you said, the ocean days for me wouldn't be a negative at all either.
I wouldn't find it either. I've never spent this much time on the open water, but I've sailed a bit, and I love being on the water. So.
When you were downsizing to the camper, I went around the world when I was young and literally had a backpack and a guitar, like truly, and spent a year traveling. Actually, more than that, because I was starting to travel, then I got hired as a stuntman in Japan and ended up staying there for 15 months. But it made you realize how little you actually need. Like, obviously more underwear than anything else. But apart from that, a couple of pairs of jeans, a couple of pairs of shorts, a hoodie, and you're pretty much golden. Yeah. What were the essentials that you distilled down to, and then were there any luxuries that you just couldn't get rid of?
Yeah, so there's a backstory to this a little bit. So the first real vacation we took together was to hike the Appalachian Trail. So that's really getting by. It's not quite a backpack and a guitar, but it's pretty darn close to it.
Absolutely.
So we hiked. We did most of it. Lisa broke her ankle about 1,800 miles in, so we had to stop. So the van actually was a step up in terms of what we could, take with us. But yeah, so, and it's actually a part of the appeal to me of the whole lifestyle is the minimalism part of it, right? Getting rid of all that baggage, all that stuff that you just accumulate over your lifetime that really doesn't give you joy anymore, So, what I found, things that I personally found, I've never been a clothes horse at all, but it's amazing how much clothing you've accumulated because you simply have room to put it in. Things that were hard to get rid of, like tools, I've always had a house that I remodeled or rehabbed. I was a carpenter on the side. I always had so that, and it wasn't so much hard. It's just I was nervous about being without that stuff because I was kind of used to always having whatever I needed in the basement or that sort of thing. So that was a little bit, tough to let go of. Anything else, I tell you, really, really wasn't. The exception would be, and this is kind of easy because they're small, but I collect watches. I collect and trade, buy and sell, whatever. And I have a box full of watches. But that's relatively small, so that was easy to not have to let go of. I downsized that as well, actually, but not so much. So the watches come with, but that's about it.
Have you ever heard of William Wood watches?
No.
That is I don't know if he's the son of a firefighter. It's been a few years since I interviewed him, but
really?
He's an English watchmaker, and he repurposes fire hose and some other things and turns them into watches. So some of them have got like the break glass and emergency. I mean, they're beautiful, beautiful watches. So
it's interesting.
I highly recommend looking that up. I think you'd be blown away.
Yeah, I'll look at it.
Well, I need to ask you, assuming that you have to park in all these different RV parks or camping sites, what are some of the funniest stories of some of the places you found yourself in the van?
Oh man, you're asking the wrong guy. I'm not a funny story guy. Boy, trying to think. I mean, we tend to gravitate. I mean, we're still, in a lot of ways, we're still learning how to do this, right? We've been doing it a couple of years now, but we tend to go from state park to state park, and those are pretty safe places in the sense that they're not really all that adventurous in a sense, right? I mean, you know what you're getting, pretty much. I think one of the things that we should have known about that we get a chuckle out of because it bothers us, I guess, more than it should, but we try to laugh it all off, is the whole animal pet dogs everywhere, people that travel with their animals. Just, now, we're in a much smaller box than most other people. Most other people are traveling in bigger rigs than us. But even with that, I just could not imagine having a dog, let alone a cat, let alone two dogs or three dogs or two or three cats or whatever. And the amount of pets that people um, travel with, and then the what they go through, right, to have these animals with them the whole time, with having to set up the fences and all of that sort of stuff, never ceases to amaze us. That people will go, because for us, part of it, a big part of it is the simplifying your life, right, uncomplicating your life. And I can't, taking a pet along doesn't seem to fit in with for me. Now I get it. I've had animals, I had dogs most of my life, and so I get the the attachment and all that. But I just couldn't imagine traveling with one, not like this, And so that, we get a chuckle out of that a whole lot, that sort of thing, and try to laugh it off because it can be frustrating sometimes. I mean, people think that you love their dog as much as they do, and I'm not so much. I've kind of had my fill of, dirty, furry, shedding, all that kind of stuff. So.
What amazes me is just the amount of money in a lot of these RVs. And it'd be one thing, whether you are a touring rock band or a movie star on a set for, or actor, should I say, for 3 or 4 months, or like yourselves, you've cashed everything out and you're traveling. I totally understand that. That's now your full investment. But the number of RVs, as they just built a, storage unit down the road from it, and it's just full of boats and RVs. So obviously these are people that are living in houses. And it blows me away, the amount of money that's spent. And to me, I just kind of think a little differently. If you're not selling everything and traveling solely living in that, why would you want to? Yeah, why don't you just stay in a fancy hotel whenever you want to travel? Why don't you rent a boat when you want to go fishing?
Yeah, and the amount of stuff that they bring with them when you see people, unloading all this stuff. I mean, they have fans outside and they have big, giant barbecue grills. I mean, full size, the whole 9 yards, And, do your thing, right? But yeah, it just amazes me. It's like, it's almost like, what's the point? If you're going to, work that hard, I don't know how much recreating you're doing. But
yeah, each their own.
It is pretty fascinating watching it, because you're right. There's a different way to do this for everybody. Some people ask, they ask, how do you like the rig? Would you do that size again or whatever? And I'm always a little reticent, because it's like, it's so personal. What works for us might be an utter disaster for somebody else.
Absolutely. I think to me, it's just, I think the most laughable thing, for example, when the gas prices were higher, everyone was complaining, but no one was saying, well, why do I have a 12-seater SUV for my one kid and a dog? So, when we're looking at healthcare in this country and national health, like, they're, trying to make us broke. It's like, well, you've got a fucking RV on your front driveway and you're telling me that you can't afford to contribute to a, national healthcare system. So that's where I struggle a little bit.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We like our toys.
Absolutely.
And it's, and if you're getting full use out of it, God bless you. That's all wonderful. But yeah, there's a lot of just accumulation of stuff.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's go origin story then. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Okay. I was born and raised in Chicago. And my father was a Chicago firefighter. And I'm one of 9 children, actually 10. There were 9 in the original brood, and my parents divorced. My dad remarried, and at the age of 60 had a son. But that's sort of like a different story almost. Anyway, so very large family. Even for the time, 9 kids, born and raised in Chicago, went to Chicago schools. And, we were not raised to be firefighters. My dad had no desire for us to follow in his footsteps. We didn't spend time at the firehouse. We didn't, that is not how we grew up. We were supposed to go to college and make something of ourselves. And, that he was part of that kind of generation that always wanted the kids to be, better. And somehow better was always something more than what they had, I guess. But it didn't work out that way because I was a really bad student. But anyway, I when the opportunity came, and here's the flip side of that whole thing is that, when the hiring in Chicago is such that it's a crapshoot. It really is. And it has been forever. This is not a recent thing. They give entrance exams maybe once every 7 to 10 years. Yeah, and the same for promotional exams and stuff like that. So you might not have any interest in, if you have the slightest interest at all in this job, when the entrance exam comes around, you take it because you might not, maybe you're not ready for the job right now or whatever. But if you're eligible to take the exam, you do, because it could be a decade before they come knock on your door. And that was pretty much the situation with me. And, my dad said, better sign up because you don't know. You're not amounting to much as it is. So,
you may as well be a fireman.
This might be good for you. So it turns out that worked out for me. And I have a younger brother that also came on the Chicago Fire Department. And I have a younger brother who went on a suburban fire department simply because that's how the timing worked for him. That's where he was. And then a nephew that's a firefighter as well now. So another generation. So yeah, it wasn't designed to be the family business, but it turned into the family business. Spent the bulk of my career in Chicago, 33 years. I was the director of training when I retired. That was my last assignment, last position. And just because, there's a lot of things that came into play of why I left. But it was like, I'm not going to go any further than this. This is where, I had maxed out my pension. And I just started looking around, what might I want to do next, and threw out a couple of resumes just to see what the market was like, if you will. And I got a job offer, which I really didn't expect, but I got a job offer. So then I had I had a shit or get off the pot. What do I want to do here? And so, I've been asking some of my friends in the suburbs, because it was a suburban job, just outside the city. And I said, anybody know this guy? I don't even know who this fire chief is. Anybody know the department? And I was asking one guy, he says, oh, yeah, he's just my best friend. I kind of know him, So, okay, there's a connection there now that I might be a little more interested in this, and I said I got an offer. I got an interview, of course, at first. And then the next thing that happened is someone else said, are you really interested in this job? And I said, well, why? He says, well, because I'm going to be on the interview board. And if you're just, fishing, I should know that, because I don't want to recommend you if you're just fishing. I'm not going to, I said, no, I'm serious about it. He said, okay. So anyway, pieces started to fall into place. I wound up getting a job offer. And so I took it. I left Chicago and went out to Algonquin-Lake and Hills Fire Protection District. And I was assistant chief out there for a couple of years. And then the guy that hired me bailed, which I kind of knew was, part of the maybe what happened sort of thing. It happened quicker than I thought it would. And they offered me the job of fire chief. So for my last 2.5 years or whatever out there, I was the fire chief. And then in 2019, April 1st of 2019, I pulled the pin. And there was a very specific reason for that, because when I came on the job, that was my first day on the job in Chicago, was April 1st. All right. So somehow that was like, okay, that's going to be my retirement date if I could pull it off. And I remember I had gotten promoted to engineer in Chicago, and I was still young on the job. And you get assigned to a relief pool. And part of my rotation was out to the airport, where at the time, especially, and even now to some extent, it's where guys kind of went out to retire, right? Retire in place. Their last few years out there, because there's not a lot of fire duty. And it's a lot busier than it used to be, but it used to be an ideal retirement spot. And anyway, so I'd rotate out there and I'd see these guys that look like they should have retired 10 years ago. And they're just sitting there with nothing to do, just waiting to be forced off the job because they didn't know what else to do with themselves. And I thought, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do 40 years on this job. And I had the benefit of coming on very young. I was 20 years old when I came on. So I could do that, right? I could, have a full career. But I promised myself not to spend 40 years working in the fire service. So in April of 2019, I'm bumping up on 40-year mark, right? and that wasn't the whole reason, but knowing that was coming, helped me make that decision. Yeah, it's time to go.
You
So
mentioned about growing up in a firefighter family, going all the way back. I want to definitely get to the transition out in a little bit. But when you reflect back now with this veteran lens that you have, and all these different conversations we're having, from family time and dynamic to mental health to all the things,
yeah.
What were the pros of growing up with a father as a firefighter, and what were the cons, if any, when you remember?
The pros were he wasn't always home, so there was, the mice are going to play, right? The cat's away, kind of thing. But then, of course, he always did come home. When your father gets home, there was all that. And I tell you that in hindsight, I don't think I appreciated it at the time, but in hindsight, that was both good and bad because, as you might expect, both my parents worked. My mom was a nurse. And so who was working and who was home? My dad worked a 24/48 shift. So my mom would work when he was off work. So, we grew up with my dad at home sometimes. And the exception would be if he could find side job that paid better than nursing, then he would work. And then as we got older, which took a while because they kept having new babies, eventually we could manage to not kill ourselves, while they were both at work. But so I had both my parents at home way before it was a popular thing or common or whatever, So I grew up with my dad at home, at least part of the time, right? More so than was common or typical, I suppose. And that was both good and bad, And I don't. It was our life. It was just normal, so I didn't think anything of it until I got old enough to be comparing myself to other kids and other families, and you go, well, this was kind of cool that dad was around a little more often than most kids saw at the time, anyway. Especially most firefighter friends, those families, because their dads were working two jobs. That was almost, well, it still is in Chicago. It's like you can't afford to live there if you don't work two jobs, basically. And in Chicago, still to this day, you have to live in the corporate city limits. So you can't move to a cheaper place, and commute in. So, the extra, the two jobs was a requirement. I mean, it's just how you got by. So I think that was that, part of it was different. And then the whole dad's gone during the holidays and things like that. My parents managed to turn that into aren't you lucky because we're going to have Christmas early kind of thing. We never saw that as some sort of terrible detriment kind of thing. And then the other, thing, that you learn is like Christmas morning, somebody that didn't have kids or whose kids were a little older would stay in. So, my dad could stay home at least for a couple hours with his kids and he'd go into work a couple hours late and stuff. So I didn't see those things. My personal experience was they weren't big kind of traumas or anything like that. So I don't know that was, I don't know if that answers your question, but I didn't, here's the other thing. We had moved by the time I was in 8th grade, we had moved up to the northwest side of the city, and we were in an area where they call it the city worker ghetto. It's no ghetto by any stretch, but it's the far northwest corner of the city, and it's one of the places where many of the city workers gravitate because the neighborhoods are just nice and what they can afford. So you're surrounded by other cops and firemen and sanitation workers and all that. So you're going to grade school, with all these other kids whose dads are cops and firefighters and stuff. So it was, in that sense, it was a big part of us growing up. We were just, the people we knew were city workers. But like I said, there was never this, follow in my footsteps, son, sort of thing. He wanted me to be a dentist or something like that.
Because obviously you were in Chicago for a long time as well. What does the call volume compare today versus when your dad was working?
It's a lot higher, but it's also different. So they certainly did more fire duty. There's just, my dad that was the heyday, right? The 60s and 70s. That was his career. And then into the A's, of course, but the peaks, of his career were, and that was the white flight out of the cities and the riots and the Vietnam War protests and all that kind of stuff. So that the fire, it was not at all an exaggeration, because I looked at the journals, at the books, they would do 3 or 4 fires in a 24-hour period, day in and day out, every shift, every day of the week, and not just in the big, busy ghetto areas of the city. I mean, that's what cities were like in the 60s and 70s. People didn't live there really unless they had to, and it was tough. And then, but they didn't have EMS, they didn't have hazmat, they didn't have CO detectors. They did have EMS in a sense, but the call volume wasn't anything like it was today. So they were certainly busy, and they did a lot of nonsense runs still. Because if you remember, many people may remember, or I might be older than I think, the street boxes, right? The fire alarm boxes on the streets, and people, that was the false alarms of their day. We have the automatic fire alarms that get triggered by whatever, but in their day, it was those boxes, those mechanical boxes that would either get bumped or hit or deliberately pulled, so they were chasing those around all the time. That was their nuisance call of that era. But they were very, very busy. Where they were busy, they were very, very busy. But it was a different kind of busy, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you're talking about the 2448, and I actually just Googled Chicago right before we sat down, and it's still a 2448, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But like you said, the absorption of EMS and all these other ones, definitely not as physically taxing as far as, strenuous activity like fighting fire, but, that continuous, unending call volume that if he was working in the 60s, what it was, 60 years later, the schedule hasn't changed at all. I think it's just important to highlight that before we move on.
Yeah, there's more. They call them daily days in Chicago. I think most places call them Kelly days. Every period, and there's that pops up more frequently than it used to. Okay, so you'll have one every 5th instead of every 6th or 7th or 10th or whatever. So there's a little more scheduled time off, but not to your point and your mission. It's still a 24/48, so you still have that non-recovery time, and then it's actually worse. So Chicago still has a EMS system where they have what they call single role medics. So they have paramedics that are not firefighters at all. They're on the fire department. The pay scale is the same, the pension, all that, but they are not sworn firefighters. They're paramedics, so they don't do any fire duty, and they work a 1 in 3. They look 1 on and 3 off. But they are, they are so chronically short of paramedics all the time that effectively they're almost working a 1 on 1 off. So it's not working in that sense.
No,
for many of them, because the call volume is so high and they can't keep paramedics. They just can't hire enough of them.
Well, while we're kind of on that topic, and I'm wondering if this is part of the reason you mentioned about transitioning out for a multiple reasons. I've had people on the fire side, on the law enforcement side in Chicago, talking about kind of organizational betrayal, and that's why they hung up their badge and their gun belt. Aside from the work week itself, what are other factors, if any, that are contributing to struggling to recruit in the Chicago area specifically?
Well, I think part of I think we have to change how we sell the job. It was sold to me, and even the guys that immediately came behind me, so like my younger brother and stuff like that, it was really about the pension, right, and the job security, and those were important things. I think they still are, but they were very important things in the 60s, 70s, 80s, right? Because you could see that was going away in private industry, but the fact that you still had a pension, you still had health care, and then you basically had a job for life as long as you didn't commit any felonies. And you needed to, and that was important, and that's kind of how you sold the job. You tell, my experience at the end of my career when I was in Algonquin, you try to tell potential recruits that, and they look at you like, so what? What's, they cannot imagine working in one location for one employer for 30 years or for 20, even for 20 years. It's just like, why on earth would I do that? And you do it because you get a pension, but that means nothing, so, it's, that's got, how we sell the job, what the benefit of the job is, has to, for us, it really was security. For my dad's generation, I think, and for mine, it was the job security that, you would put up with a whole lot because of that, because it offered you that security. And the promise of the pension was a big deal. And it is a big deal. I mean, I'm making more in retirement than most people make going to work every day. Now I paid for that and it took me 40 years, but it's there. A lot of people work very hard and don't have squat. But it's hard to sell that today. I don't think I could see it when they sold it to me, because that's part of growing up with it, right? I just lived that part of it day in and day out. And with a family of 9 kids, that whole idea of you always have a job meant something, right? You didn't have to worry about seasonal work. You didn't have to worry about, the construction jobs would go away in the winter and things like that. So
it's interesting because I just had a conversation with Doug Orchard, who's a documentary maker, and he's working on a film at the moment on how private equity firms are dipping into state and county pensions. And so I think one of the challenges of this young generation is, back in, when you were working, I'm assuming that was when healthcare also actually paid for the doctor and all these things. And you might have had a $10 copay. My generation was the high deductibles. So basically the only way you'll ever use your insurance is if you get hit by a bus or are chronically ill. Otherwise, you're just basically paying out of pocket and paying these premiums as well. And then now with the pensions, like when I was in Florida, the governor there, Rick Scott, actually cut our pension. So you're slicing and dicing all these things that were that stability and that promise. And I think that the younger generation, they're not being told that or sold that because we don't believe that that's actually still going to be there at that point.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because the pensions are in danger. When you hear about what's happening to these pensions, there are organizations where their retirees 10 years later might be getting 10 cents to the dollar on their pensions. So I think we need to reframe it because, ultimately the reason to go into the job is service. It really is, and taking care of our people. But if the things that used to be the carrot on the stick have basically been, absolutely decimated, then it isn't a lure anymore.
No, it's not. And I think even if they weren't being decimated, it wouldn't be the lure because there's just a different expectation about what work should be, which is not bad. It's a good thing, right? You want to get more out of your job than just a paycheck, and it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to use a parallel. When I started talking to some of the MMA fighters and coaches, there was a push because of head trauma and CTE and all these things. There was a push to do a lot more light sparring, drills, bag work, all that kind of thing, and limit the sparring for occasionally and then in the cage. And then if you look at the strength conditioning world, with the CrossFit and all these other ones, it was only, 4 times a week for an hour would get you extremely fit. And so that less is more has become, a reality. And then you look at the corporate business world, they've moved to a 4 8-hour day. And it's not that these employees are weaker. It's just that actually they realize it actually forges performance. They're more innovative, they're happier, they're healthier. And so the downstream costs are less. Go back to our profession in 2025, we're struggling to recruit anyone. And so our men and women are being forced to work, sometimes 80 plus hours a week. And we're wondering why no one wants to do this anymore.
Yeah. I think you're spot on with that. I think I guess again in my generation you couldn't work enough overtime, and it just, and part of it was it didn't come up as often, right? But you would never, nobody would ever turn down overtime. You just wouldn't, and now it's kind of routine. It's hard to find guys to work the overtime. And to your point, it's because they're overworked to begin with. They're working. I think we underappreciate how hard they're working sometimes. Even in this, like I finished my career in this suburb where it was kind of funny because, they coming from where I did, and we didn't always know how to um, talk to one another, if you will, because that like they had to learn, like if they looked at me and said either directly or through another officer, well, you don't understand, chief, we were really busy that day, why something didn't get done. And I was like, really? You have any idea what busy means? But so they had to learn not to say that, and I had to learn that they do a lot of other things than chase, more so than the guys in the city do, so to speak. So, but we both had to readjust to that, sort of what expectations, were, and what made for a good excuse um, to the new boss,
Yeah.
and we're really busy wasn't. But I think you're right. Is that a guy like me, intuitively thinks, well, you didn't go to any fires today, so you didn't do anything, and I'm somebody that should know better, right? And does know better, but still, because of when I came on, because of my age and my history, that's still my gut reaction, right? You didn't do much today, and that couldn't be more wrong. They're working harder than ever, and it's more stressful. Fires aren't really all that stressful, especially for the firefighter. They're stress relievers. You get to break shit, get dirty,
100%.
release all that aggression, right? They're not stressful. They can be stressful for the officers, and the post incident can be stressful for a firefighter, but it's not stressful work, generally speaking. All the other stuff is, right? The EMS stuff, the dealing with the public, the trauma, those are stressful. And so I think that a guy like me underappreciates that, the impact that all of that. Even though I lived through it, and I didn't live through it like they're living through it today.
Well, it's interesting because I talk about dispatchers. I think that's the perfect example, because you've got, a dispatcher on the phone in a darkened room that probably arrived when the sun was still down, went into this room, sat with no windows and electric light. Now they're on the phone to a mother who's trying to revive their 1-year-old who's not breathing.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to talk him through the whole, CPR algorithm. The mother's screaming, where the hell are they? Where the hell are they? They finally get there, and then they're disconnected because they're there now. So all that stress, and they're still sitting in a chair in a dark room. At least, like if we work, a code on someone, on an adult, there's still, like you said, some sort of physical offload, and then we can take them to the hospital and talk to the doctors and nurses. And did we miss anything? And, what did you find? The dispatcher has all that stress, and then, right, phone's ringing again, pick it up. So I think there is a lot that you're talking about. I always said the same thing. There's no more kind of flow state than loading hose or cleaning saws after an amazing fire, and you've got that camaraderie, and you're tired and you're joking with each other. But on an EMS, and even more so in dispatch, you don't have that same ability to go from extreme stress to, all right, clear the call, take the next one.
Yeah. And I don't see that getting any better, actually, anytime soon. But
yeah. Going back to your early life then, you ended up obviously being in a very physical job. What were you playing and doing as far as sport and exercise?
Me and balls never got along. I was in my youth activity was the Cavaliers Drum and Bugle Corps. I was in a drum and bugle corps, and it was a all male. I think it still is. I'm not sure. It was a all male. It came from a Boy Scout troop originally, and it was just one of those things. I don't know, friend of a friend kind of thing. Somebody got me involved in the whole thing, and I beat on a drum and marched around. It was a very, very physical activity, actually, and it's very competitive. And it was summer based for the most part, but you would have practice all year long. But that was my sport, if you will. I did that all through high school and beyond, because I never got along with balls, really. I was never, I played Little League, and they would put me in because I'm left-handed. So I got to play because I would stand close. I wasn't afraid of getting hit by a pitch, and I could stand close to the plate. And as a left-handed kid, it's hard to pitch to. So my on-base percentage wasn't so bad. But yeah, that was about it. So drum and bugle corps was where I grew up, if you will. That was my sport.
You mentioned as well
Never hit
about
a golf ball in my life. You know, so yeah, I'm not much of a sports guy.
you mentioned about your dad recommending that you put your name in the list for the fire service. When you were in the high
Yeah,
school, what were you dreaming of becoming then?
I don't know. I really, I don't want to, dramatize. I wasn't a lost soul. But really, I didn't have any, looking back on it, didn't have any particular direction. Kind of kicking that can down the road. I'll figure that out later. I went to a technical, what was called at the time a technical high school. It's basically a trade school. So I had shop classes as part of my curriculum, and a lot of math and a lot of science. So I was gravitating in that direction, engineering maybe, but I wasn't a good enough student for that. I think I could have been, perhaps, that all that hindsight kind of thing. But typically, kids that went to the high school I went to would wind up in the trades, or drafting was still a thing back then. Print shop, they had a big print shop there. So those sorts of trade like careers. And that's probably where I would have wound up if it wasn't the fire department. I'd have been an electrician, I think, to be honest with you.
Walk me through then the front door of the fire service. Firstly, I mean, just as far as the training, because I know you work a lot with UL now as well. What was the PPE that you had back then, and then when you reflect back now, what were the tactics, if different than they use today?
So here's a kind of an interesting thing. I came on the job in 1980. It was probably 81 or 82, somewhere in the first couple of years of my job, that Chicago had the first mandatory mask order on the Chicago Fire Department, and it, of course, wasn't enforced right away. But they didn't even have one. They didn't even have a SOP that said "Thou shalt wear a mask." And so, and in Chicago switched to full bunker gear from 3/4 boots to full bunker gear in, take a guess, 2006 is when they
Oh
made the
my goodness!
transition.
I was already in the fire service by that point. That's insane.
Right. So that's when I got my first pair. And it's a curious thing. Now here's, and I guess most firefighters, even today, if you ask them, where did the term bunker gear come from? Why is it called bunker gear? Right. So Chicago had bunker gear. You weren't required. First off, you bought your own gear at the time. And you weren't required to have bunker gear or wear it, but it was available to you for purchase if you wanted it. And what bunker gear was, the whole purpose of the pants and the boots was that you would get out of your bunk in the middle of the night and slip into those. Right. That's when and where guys wore that gear, was when they were working, through the night, and they would just get up and that'd be next to the bed, and you'd step into your boots and pull up the pants. They weren't as protective as they are today, of course. They were just heavy canvas pants, and the coats were basically just heavy canvas coats. But that's where the term came from. So yeah, some guys wore bunker gear on occasion when it was cold out, because that's what it was for. It was to get dressed warmly or dress quickly and keep warm. But they didn't transition to true bunker gear until 2006. So that's kind of how far behind they were in that respect. And so there was not a culture of wearing your SCBA and all that for probably the first half of my career. Yeah, and that's largely changed. They still have now. It could be, I don't. It's not like I, monitor the current state of the SOPs on the Chicago Fire Department, but to the best of my knowledge, they still do not require the firefighters on the roof to wear SCBA when they're on the roof. So they got some work to do in that respect. So how that translates into tactics, right? So I don't, and this is something that when I was working with UL and talking to guys about the different things that we were advocating, if you will, right? I think there's a lot of this sort of myth about, you got to prove yourself, you got to be tough enough, you got to all that sort of shit. And I would say, look, man, first off, my dad didn't have an SCBA, quite literally, for almost his entire career. When he was on, as a street level firefighters, because he obviously he was on the job through 1990s actually, but they didn't even have them. When I first came on the job, 1980, there was not a SCBA on the apparatus for every firefighter necessarily. There might be, there might not be. There might be 4 guys and only 3 SCBAs. You never really know. So that was the state of things. So they didn't even have the option in a lot of cases. And even when they had the SCBA and were wearing it, they didn't have hoods. They didn't have anything like the coat that you have, and they were wearing 3/4 boots. And I got to tell you, they were some of the toughest son of a bitches you ever met in your life. But they were not crawling down that hallway without an SCBA. You can't breathe 250-degree air. I don't care how tough you are. You simply cannot do it, right? So they weren't fighting fires the way you think they were, right? They weren't crawling down that hallway that you are crawling down today. You're crawling it down that hallway today because you've got bunker gear and an SCBA. And that enables you to do something they couldn't do, which means you're in an environment that they never experienced, right? They had to cool ahead of themselves. They had to cool and vent extensively ahead of themselves before they could even make that entry. Now, there's a in-between point, right? Because they did breathe smoke, and but not. You simply cannot breathe 250 degrees. I mean, it closes your airway and you're done, right? So you were doing something different than what you think they were doing.
You're telling me that they didn't just breathe through a mustache or a beard and it magically cooled the air to breathability?
Yeah, I mean, there was. I got to tell you, I mean, I did this shit because this was, and I gratefully didn't do it for very long, but I did do it. You did this, and it's helpful. It makes a difference, but you're not making the push that you could make if you're properly dressed. So as this tradition of aggressive interior firefighting, yes, but not what you think it was. Because you simply, when you're wearing what they were wearing, when you can't wear what you are used to wearing today, you simply cannot be in that environment. You cannot. And they weren't, right? They would cool from the front door or the front hall or from wherever it was safe and possible to cool. And then they would advance to the extent that they could advance. Simply because they were human beings, and human beings have these limitations, So from a tactical standpoint, the fire service has become, and I think this is part of what happened and that what we bumped into when we started doing the work with UL, is you had a fire service in the 1960s and 70s that now they got bunker gear, now they got SCBAs. And I mean, they had them before, but I mean, they got them in a way that they could use them all the time, right? They were available, they were working properly, they were easy to use. And so your gear caught up with the fires and then actually surpassed it in a sense, I think, because the fuel loads in the buildings sort of stayed the same where the fires were, right? Where the work was still these old buildings with old fuel loads. And now I got really good gear and now I'm kicking ass and taking names. And then the built environment changed and you got plastics and you got lightweight construction and you got all of this. And now it's gotten ahead of us again. And I think that's part of what's happening and why we're seeing in this latter stage of my career and even today, what you're seeing where guys are getting caught in these environments now, buildings coming down on them and the flashovers and things like that. Firefighters didn't, in my dad's era, in my early career, that's not how you got burned or injured or whatever in this kind of catastrophic event. The building might fall down on you, but that was flat out stupidity when that happened because you had to be there for so long for that to happen that that was just foolishness. But the whole caught in the flashover, burnt to death kind of thing, that didn't happen then because you couldn't be there to begin with, But we're seeing that now because now we can be there. Doesn't mean we should be, but we can. We've got the protective gear that enables us to be in an environment that we either shouldn't be in at all or we should not be there but for a few seconds that it takes to change the environment.
Having a gypsy career in the fire service. So I trained in Orlando. First job was Hialeah in the Miami area. Then went out to California for a few years, was on a truck company. Then moved back to the East Coast, was on Orange County, very busy kind of I was on an
Yeah.
engine, but also rescue. So now we're doing heavy EMS transport. And then the last one was the one that protects Disney. So really kind of bizarre, unique perspective, but it gave me that kind of 30,000-foot view.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I started seeing a lot of the misinformation. So perfect example, I go to California, incredible truck operations training. We're doing building
Yeah.
construction. We're just drilling and drilling and drilling and drilling roof ops. Anaheim was excellent at getting on the roof, cutting, and then getting the
Yeah.
hell off the roof straight away. And then I go back to the East Coast and they're like, oh, we don't do vertical ventilation here because it's lightweight construction. And I'm like,
Yeah.
but the whole building is lightweight construction in California because of the earthquakes. So what are you talking
Yeah.
about? And you would rather put 3 companies of people under the roof than put a company on the roof to make a chimney. And I've seen it, many, many times when I've been interior on a fire where the truck company's above us. All of a sudden, everything gets bare. Oh, there's the fire. You walk over and you put it out. So I just
Mm-hmm.
started seeing some of the fallacies, the way I was taught to throw a ladder in Florida, the way that we treat a car fire like a Class A fire instead of the Class B fire that it actually is. So talk to me about that. We're so siloed as a profession with each city and county, and a lot of times not even really knowledge sharing unless you go to conferences and have the humility to learn.
It's yeah. So we're the word I always use is parochial. Silo is probably a better word, but the American Fire Service, and it's not that it isn't volunteer in other places, other countries, it is, but not to the extent it's here because it's beyond volunteer. It's local, it's community, and there's all kinds of value to that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking any of that part of it, but the downside to all that is you wind up with what I call family owned and operated fire departments, right? The same small group of people in this community have run this thing for forever and ever and made it work, whether it's volunteer, transitions, maybe to pay out on call, full time. That doesn't always change things, right? It's still this family owned and operated fire department. So this is the way we do things here. You'll hear that today. And the Chicago Fire Department is and has been one of the biggest fire departments in this country forever. And you will still hear guys say, like it's gospel, well, this is the Chicago way. This is the way we do it here. That can have some value, right? But in my personal opinion, there's more of a downside to that than not, because you're doing this, right? We don't need to. We are so good. We are so knowledgeable. We know, and that can just get you in trouble. And it often does. And I think that's what happens is, Brunencini was a genius in many ways. And one of the genius things he did was, I heard him say, he would ask, well, why do we do it that way? Right. And the answer is, well, because that's the way we've always done it. And Alan had the foresight or the sense to ask the follow-up question, well, why did we always do it that way? And the answer is because it works, or at least it worked, right? Nobody sat down around the kitchen table and said, okay, let's make up some really dangerous, lame-brained, stupid, nonsensical tactics for these guys, these new guys to learn that'll really fuck them up, right? And let's do that to them. Nobody sat down to do that, right? When they're passing along their traditions and their understandings, they're doing it because that's what worked for them. Right, that made sense to them. It worked, and they want to share that knowledge with you. Okay, and that's a wonderful thing, and that's part of what makes the fire service unique is this culture of passing along knowledge, right, and earning your place and all those things. But we have to be cognizant that there's always a cost for any of this stuff, right? And the cost can be that you lose your perspective, right? It can turn into we've always done it that way. The example that I've might not be so relevant anymore, but that I often gave is that at least in my early career, my early training part of my career, I guess, when I was starting to get into training, one of the things we would teach guys to do is vent as they searched. All right, you're calling along, you get to a window, what do you do with it? You vent it. And I could usually get any classroom full of guys to say, yeah, you vent it. You vent the window. Well, why do you vent the window? right? Well, you want to get lift. You want to be able to improve your visibility. They had all these reasons why you would do this, right? I said, okay, that's all fine, right? But that can come with consequences, right? If nobody's suppressing. I said, where's the fire going to come? It's going to come to your location and all this kind of thing. But I would try to back it up and say, okay, if I were to ask somebody in my dad's generation why they vented that window, they would not say because of lift. They would not say because of visibility or survivability or anything like that. They'd say you take that window, you stick your head out the window, you take a couple of breaths of fresh air, and now you can continue your search. That's why they vented that window as they searched. Not for all these other reasons that we've invented to justify, because we no longer vent to breathe, right? So when we lose our why, when we stop asking, well, why do we do it that way, right? Does it still work, right? Then we can lose that, understanding. It was worth the risk in my dad's time because they didn't have any other choice. That's how you kept searching. You don't need to do that anymore to keep searching. So maybe in some situations, there's alternative tactics to use, right? So long-winded answer, I think, and I went off my deep end, but, I think that our traditions, as valuable as they are, can get in our way if we stop asking why. And if you can't, as a senior man or senior officer, senior person, as the person, charged with passing on this knowledge, if you can't answer that young kid's why, that's his job, is to ask why. That's his, if you got somebody who's not asking why, that's scary to me. And you shouldn't be complaining about they always asking why. They're supposed to ask why. And if you can't provide them with an answer, then get out of the way, because you're not part of the solution. You owe them a why. And if we can answer the why, then it's great. But I think we owe them that part of it.
The topic I talk about that I'm probably hated for the most is when I point that very thing out about the American fire helmet. And if you look over my shoulder, you can see I've got the schematics on my wall, and I think it says the patent was 1937. So firstly, at that time, that was the latest and greatest that they bought into. Secondly, you have a fire service that then will ridicule arguably better helmets around the world because they, air quotes, look stupid. Now, I never became a firefighter because I wanted to look cool. I became a firefighter because I wanted to help people. And as soon as there was better technology, I'm all ears. A tick? That sounds amazing. I can see through the smoke. Phenomenal.
Yeah.
But I see that, and then what's the response you get? Well, it's tradition. Like, bullshit.
Yeah.
That's a hat.
It's a curious thing to me, because I could do the same thing. Every department I was on, we wore the traditional helmets. And then when I was in Algonquin, actually, they had transitioned to them just before I got there. And they were wearing the lighter colored gear, the brownish, whatever. And for some reason, they wanted black. And I really don't care. Maybe there's a big difference, but I didn't care. And we were cycling through the gear, and they wanted black. And the guy that was in charge of it, the lieutenant, was doing all the work and did a really good job in all other aspects. And I said, if you want black, get black. That's fine. You got black. As they're getting the gear, I managed to secure a European helmet, and I started wearing that around. This is right at the end of my career. Scared the shit, because they know that they're getting new gear now, right? It scared the shit out of them. They thought, oh, shit. Because I had done a couple other things like that where, and they thought, oh, my God, is she going to make us wear these helmets, right? I feel the same way as you. It's like, and the things that I would tell guys, I go, well, first off, and this is where I worry a little bit because I was never in the armed forces. I never served in the military, right? So I can't really speak. I'm nervous about using them as an example because I wasn't there. I wasn't one of them. All that being said, is the Marine Corps a tradition-bound organization? Are they proud of their traditions? Absolutely, right? I mean, any Marine will tell you, hoorah, right? I mean, they put the cult in culture, for crying out loud, and they're proud of it. You will not see a Marine wearing a World War II, Vietnam era with a helmet into battle. I mean, it wouldn't, right? They don't wear their traditions into battle. They wear their traditions in parades and at ceremonies, right? And they're very proud of it, as they should be, and as we should be. But why are you wearing your traditions into battle? I don't get it. Because, and then the other one I would throw at them, and you're welcome to steal it because it pisses them off, is I say, you want to be an aggressive interior firefighter? Wear a helmet designed for aggressive interior firefighting.
Absolutely.
The helmet you're wearing was designed to shed water as you were standing outside the building, right? It was to keep the sparks in the water. It was worn with a raincoat and was meant to shed water. That was all it was meant to do. You want to be an aggressive interior firefighter, get a helmet designed to do that.
Yeah.
That'll light them up.
But the thing is, it's just simply saying, look, this to me, it's the scapegoat. It's the example of the ego that's attached to this profession of service. And you see people talk about, well, it's for them. It's like, well, it's not though, because you keep posting pictures of yourself in your hat and you grow your mustache out, and it's about you. If it's about them, you don't care how you look, as long as whatever you're wearing is going to help you effect a rescue. And there was a bailout a few months ago, and it was like a second story ladder bailout. And the moment he leant over the ladder, the helmet came off. You know what I mean? So what if he'd fallen and a simple, better helmet would have saved his life, but instead he died of a fracture, a skull fracture. So this is the point, is like, to me, the tradition is camaraderie and service and teamwork and courage. That's the tradition of the fire service. What we wear is just the equipment. That's it. And we have to disconnect those two. And then let's talk about fitness too. If you really are all about performance, then why the hell aren't you at the front of the line advocating for the rest and recovery and the shifts that will actually forge performance and fitness standards and, mindfulness and all these things that are going to create the flow state of a high level operator, as a paramedic, as a firefighter? But you're not. You just bought a hat. That doesn't make you an amazing firefighter.
Yeah. It's an easy rabbit hole to go down, and this was another thing that Bruno had said to me in an offsite of a conversation about these helmets. He said, my wish for you is that you're still around when America makes the switch, that you're still here, that you're still in the fire. And it didn't happen, right? But it was one of, again, with Alan, it was just that insight that, this needs to happen, right? And it's possible someday we'll come around. And I'll tell you, so here's another thing, and I could be wrong on this, but as long as we're going to beat this one up, we were gravitating as a country toward not so much the European one, but I think we would have gotten there, because the very traditional New Yorker, Boston, whatever, Chicago style was going to more of a metro helmet, right? So it was rounder in shape and shorter brim and that sort of thing. Helmet. And that was the trend in the country until 9/11, right? And then the face of the fire service became New York City, as it naturally would have, right? And from that moment on, every firefighter in the country wanted to wear that helmet. And I believe that took place. I watched it happen. I was before and after, and and I think that stopped that trend toward a different style helmet. Is that we all wanted to look that way now, because we were America's heroes all of a sudden, and that became the image of America's heroes. So yeah, that's how we want to look. I'm 100% in agreement with you. I can't understand. Because and it's funny, going back into probably the 1990s. Again, Chicago's still wearing 3/4 boots, not just the leather helmets, but and some European guys are riding in Chicago. They came to visit there, so they got permission to ride on one of the rescue squads, and they've got their gear with them, right? And the guys in Chicago on the squad, they're putting it on. They're putting the helmet on, and the way the face piece clipped in and everything. And they go, "This is cool. This is great. This is great. I'd never wear it, but this is great." Their intuitive response was, "I get it. This makes perfect sense, right? But I'd never wear it because it don't look right." It's like, whatever.
Well, just to underline, so you're a generational firefighter, and you were the chief of training in Chicago Fire Department, and you have this perception. I'm just going to leave it right there.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, so kind of as a tangent to that, which I think is very important, you've talked about, a revered fire department that when we look behind the curtain, didn't have mandates for SCBAs for the longest time, didn't have mandates for bunker gear for even longer, which blows my mind. So let's talk about how do we turn the ship around. There's no question in my mind from what I've witnessed in 20 plus years that I've been either wearing a uniform or doing this now, that one of the challenges obviously is ego, and this, again, this kind of projection of what a fire department should look like. But then we also see all the funerals. So we know that the way that a lot of these things are done is not working. What were the barriers to change in Chicago fire on these areas? Because there must have been people beating the drum saying we need to make the change back then too. And then how do we overcome these barriers in 2025 so we can really forge a healthy, high-performing fire service in America?
Yeah. Chicago makes a bad example because it's not just the fire department. The city itself is unique in a lot of different ways. Because of its political history and the state's political history and stuff. I often say there's, the agenda of every meeting in the city of Chicago, regardless of the department, is exactly the same. The first question in something comes up, what's the item number one? And item number one is, get bunker gear for the fire department. Okay. I got a question. Do we have to? Well, no. Okay. Next item. If the answer is no, if we don't have to, they won't do it. And I think that permeates everything in the city of Chicago, every department. They kind of just get on to say, we're not going to be able to do it if we don't have to. Unless they're compelled, we're not going to do it. And so there's just this inertia that's built into the culture, not just the fire department, but the city of Chicago. There's this culture of inertia that we don't do anything that we're not compelled to do if it wasn't our idea to begin with. And even then, any idea internally that comes up, well, we don't have to do that, do we? No. Well, okay, next, and I think that was really because the bunker gear, I mean, honest to God, we had somebody wearing bunker gear on and off in the city of Chicago Fire Department, probably for 15 years, right? We were always testing it. And that was the way they kicked that can down the road. Oh yeah, we're still testing that. And I don't know why they finally pulled the trigger. I don't know if it was, somebody got hurt or whatever. I don't know what it was that compelled them, but they finally did. Anyway, I think if we're going to look at how do we make these fundamental changes, I really do think that ultimately it's going to be through the union, through the international, because and they're on board with a lot of things, health and safety wise and stuff like that. But when they make the connection, when they connect the dot, and public, and if somebody from the international were to publicly say, what, these helmets have got to go, that will change the conversation. But you need somebody in the international that's got the courage or the sense and really believes that this is the case, that these have got to go. And we have to find a way to make that happen. I think then, because and I've often felt this, if you had any one major city fire department switch to the different style helmets, that would break the mold. Right now it's okay. Right now somebody else can do it because one major department did it. You'd only need one chink in the armor, and it certainly wouldn't happen overnight, but you'd need that first one. And that first one might need to be the international, and those sorts of things. Same thing with I remember a union official in Chicago when some of the sleep studies first started coming out. Right, this is all post 9/11 when we had money for the first time to do things and look at things and all that. And I remember the whole sleep study stuff when it first came out, and this guy said flat out, he said, I am not going to be the one that gets blamed for the loss of the 24-hour shift. Because that was the assumption at the time, was that you're going to have to go to a 10 and 14 or an 8-hour shift or whatever, right? So that you're not up for 24 hours. He says, I'm not going to be the guy that loses that shift, right? And that's as far as he could think through the thing. So if that's where they're starting from, then it's never right. It's never going to happen. And I think that's changed. But I also think that some of these other things, if the international isn't on board, I don't see them happening.
I've called them out before for the simple fact that our international leadership is out of Boston now, and Boston
Yeah,
works 24/72. And yet
yeah,
there has been zero conversation about, well, if we work 24/72, why shouldn't
yeah,
the rest of the country work 24/72? So putting the
right,
helmets on, aside from it, that's obviously just a separate conversation. It's not, not a hill I want to die on, but the work week is. And this is what really
yeah,
disappoints me. Like Fairfax, they still work 56 hours. So again, shows
yeah,
the absolute epic failure of leadership with that administration. But now
right,
the current one works a 42-hour work week and is looking
yeah,
across the country at these 56 and this mandatory overtime, these 8-hour weeks and these suicides and all the things, and they're tight-lipped. And I say,
yeah,
shame on you. Like, better. You actually enjoy that work week. Your men and women are enjoying that work week, and you're watching, not to mention the federal firefighters that are working 72 hours.
right,
So
right.
if we're talking about courage and leadership, the IAFF needs to stand the fuck up and talk about the work week.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just and that sort of thing has to happen. There needs to be a more of a groundswell, right? Of push for these sorts of things, and I don't know, and you would have a better sense of this because of your background, but um, I I've always, one of the bones I always had to pick with unionism in this country in general, right, is as compared to the model in other countries, right, is that they look at health and safety. These are basic, fundamental industrial hygiene issues, right? They're not looking at it as this is just your workplace should not be contributing to your or should not be a detriment to your health and your welfare, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, and that's industrial hygiene. That's a simple, basic concept, and we get it all messed up with all these with the traditions and the this and the that, and it's just as a union, you should be all about this. What makes the workplace, you know, the safest possible workplace I can provide for my employees. That's what you should be advocating for. And be damned their traditions. That's not your job. That's their job. If they want to preserve some traditions or something, that's their business, right? That's that administration's business. That's the organization's business. The labor union, I think, should be that radical voice that says these other things are more important.
Yeah.
And you know, part of it is where, and I think you hit on it, and it's not. It's just the look at where it's located. And where its officers come from, where its people come from, the internals, right? That is probably the most tradition bound part of the fire services in that part of the country. So you could expect the changes to be a little more difficult, right? Because culturally they grew up with all these. If they grew up in California, where they're proud of their helmet, they don't want to give up theirs either. But um, completely different, right? In a completely different sense of the built environment, a lot of things. But those guys don't make it into the hierarchy of the international because they're not in that part of the country, right? And that's how those things tend to work, right? If you have to be around it, to be a part of it. But that's my take. I think we're making changes, and I think but if we want to accelerate it, and if we want to get over those next big humps, I think the international has to be on board.
Yeah. Well, there is a
One way, shape,
groundswell.
or form.
The Florida, we
Yeah,
have 10 departments that have gone to the 24/72 in the last 2 years. Actually, just the other
yeah,
day, an Illinois department outside Chicago became either the first or second in your state. We've got Tennessee, we've got North Carolina, Plano, Texas
yeah,
just became the first in Texas, and there's another one near them that's trying to become the second. So there is this groundswell now. The governor signed in the I forget the term because it's not actually the mandate, but a recommendation that the 42-hour work week should be standard in the state of Florida for firefighters. So there's enough groundswell now that I know this is being acknowledged. It's being rebuked. The Florida Fire Chiefs Association an email saying that they do not agree with the 42-hour work week. These are chiefs that work 40 hours a week. So, some of the pushback is evident as well. But, I think there's a point now where enough is enough. Like, are you going to come on board? Or are you still going to, hide behind whatever? And it's never, like you said, it's the 8s or the 12s. Anyone that's actually looked into this for more than half a second will see, no, that wasn't an option, because as I've pointed out, people that work 8s and 12s are ER physicians and nurses and cops and corrections officers and dispatchers. Do any of those professions make you think of a svelte tactical athlete? No, we know those shifts are awful for humans as well. We have a house, we have a firehouse. 24s are great. Let's just give more rest and recovery in between.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's almost too obvious. I don't know. It's a strange. I don't know. You've been looking at this longer than me, and you probably have a background that gives you more insight into it. But Chicago actually turned down 24/72s years and years ago. The firefighters did. So because of those single role medics, right? There was an FLSA lawsuit, right? There's an exemption to the 40-hour work week through FSLA. For emergency, for firefighter. The way it's written is for firefighters, right? That they don't have to meet the 40-hour maximum, or you don't have to pay the overtime for firefighters. Well, in Chicago, they have this large group of paramedics that aren't firefighters. They're not cross-trained, so they're single-role medics, right? So there was this, they had to do something. They had to reduce their hours, or they'd be paying them overtime every week. So they went to the 1 and 3 for the paramedics, and they proposed that, well, let's just put the whole fire department on the 1 and 3. And the firefighters didn't want it because it would be different, because they'd lose their Kelly day, right? They'd lose that 5 days off, and they wanted to keep that 5 day, and those are nice. They are. But they turned down the 1 and 3 because they didn't, I don't know.
Yeah. 5 days off every 3 weeks versus 3 days. Well, not even 3 days. It's 2 days off really, if you look at the math. But yeah, the 72 every single shift.
Yeah. So we turned it down, and I was like, okay. And I think the union was even on board at the time. It was one of those, the vote was no, we don't want to do it. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, I think what are you going to do?
This is what's interesting. We'll get off this topic in a second, because I want to get back into the training side. But when I did that presentation in California, which I don't normally do, but that was the only thing that I really talk about these days, as far as if I'm going to stand in front of a group. In California, it was like blowing their minds. They'd never even had the concept of a shorter work week given to them. Like you said, they're in an echo chamber in themselves. But it's just simply when you do the math, if you distill down that the average person works an 8-hour day, so a 9-hour day with a 1-hour lunch. If you do the same math with the fire service, we don't work 1 day on, 2 days off. We work 3 days on, 1 day off. And then that ends up being not 10 days a month, but 30 days a month. And then if you extrapolate that over the whole year, we work 364 days a year. So we go around telling our neighbors we have the greatest schedule, and I'm always home, and I've got a side job. But in the reality, that's just complete smoke and mirrors. And like you said, if we go back far enough in history, 24 hours in a firehouse when, you probably did run maybe a fire a week, and you're hanging out with your boys and you're drinking and all that stuff. Yeah, totally different. But that is not the fire and EMS combined system of 2025. So we have to evolve. We wear SCBAs for a reason. Our favorite athletes don't stay up 4 days a week, to perform, so.
The whole sleep deprivation thing, that alone, I just can't figure out. Because that's so patently obvious. I mean, I don't think that's controversial at all anymore, what that does to you. And, it's just accepted that, okay, that you have to avoid that at all costs. Well, unless you're a firefighter, then we'll screw it. Then we'll do it, Or worse yet, a paramedic. I mean, these paramedics in Chicago that are, literally, and it's not just the busiest of the busy. You're averagely busy. Is there such a thing as, your middle of the road ambulance? They come to work in the morning. They get their first run. Oftentimes they relieve them at the hospital, whatever. I mean, and they're not back in that firehouse for 24 hours. They get their meals handed to them quite literally. They come in, somebody hands them their meals, and they go off on the next run. Mm-hmm. And that's common. That's as common as the day is long. They do not stop moving for the whole 24 hours. There's no downtime whatsoever. And they do this day in and day out and day in and day out. That's destroying people. And a lot of times when they're short enough, right? And if the guy is desperate enough financially, he'll do that every other day, indefinitely, because there's that much work available.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is the thing. When you hear the cancer conversation, no one talks about the fact that sleep deprivation is a known carcinogen or shift work.
Right.
When you talk about the mental health conversation, no one talks about the fact that the way that you process trauma and that you heal is when you're asleep. So it's the amplifier for everything that we kill us, the heart disease, the strokes, all the things. It is directly related, directly correlated. Yet it's the one thing that we could change that would impact all the deaths from all the different reasons. And like you said, there's a resistance to it.
Yeah. Go figure.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other side of the conversation too, while we're talking about Chicago, Al Capone obviously is a well-known gentleman, and that was out of alcohol prohibition. And when we finally, as a country, went, this isn't working, we have gangsters murdering everyone, we stopped. Yeah. And then was born drug prohibition. Harry Anslinger, and basically between job justification and racism, he became reefer madness, and now we've seen what we've seen today.
Yeah.
And this is a conversation that we need to be having as well. If we look at the proactive elements that would make Americans happier and healthier, that would then alleviate a lot of the stress on the hospitals, on EMS, and we wouldn't have these, these insane call loads as well. But there's zero conversation about decriminalizing addiction, not smuggling, not selling, but addiction, about the health of the nation. We're 70% obese or overweight, and we wonder why our EMS system is crumbling. Well, make people healthier, like you promised, for example, a year ago in election time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, all right. You mentioned data as well. So this is coming from UL. Talk to me about the importance of studies, but I'd love to also contrast that with, as you alluded to earlier, when the call for data sometimes is put as a deliberate hurdle for progress.
So I think the great leap that UL is helping us make, right, is that we've re-engaged with the technological and scientific part of our profession, which we were once upon a time engaged with and then got disengaged from, in my view of it. So we went along, post World War II, and actually maybe even leading up to, but primarily post World War II into the 60s, right, with the space race and that age and all that. I mean, technology, that was the thing. Everybody wanted the latest, greatest, right? And the fire service really was no different. That's when most of the equipment and the technology and stuff that we're familiar with and that we've developed and refined during the course of our lifetimes came into being. I'll give you my favorite example was the Chicago Fire Department under Robert J. Quinn, who is the fire commissioner for, 50 years or some ridiculous thing. Before he became mentally ill, which he truly did, he got a little wacky, but they kept him in office. But during the prime of his career, he was an innovator. He was a forward thinker. Chicago Fire Department had a fleet of maybe 6, 8, maybe more high pressure pumpers. Right now, if you try to introduce that into the United States right now, they go, that's European, that's somebody else, that's whatever, that's not the way we do it. It is the way we did it once upon a time, at least in Chicago, and there were other places. And the rank and file hated them. And the reason they hated them was because the guys that were assigned, if you had one in your area, they would send it on the initial response. Those guys could lead out and get water so fast they'd steal your fire from you. That's why they hated them, not because they didn't work. They worked so damn well that the guys hated them. Or so the story goes, right? And that's from my dad, right? So it's not firsthand, but it's pretty close. so they had these things, right? The fire service as a whole, and this backward place that I keep complaining about was a forward thinking place at one time. Very forward thinking place at one time. The Chicago is, or the commissioner was famous for inventing, or at least adopting and implementing, the snorkel piece of apparatus that you don't see around much anymore. But it was an articulating platform. It was one of the first articulating platforms that was ever put out. But then, then we lost connection with in my mind, the science and engineering that surrounds our core mission, which is putting out fires, right? How did this happen? Well, I think a couple of things happened. One is we got so damn busy and so damn poor, and we could hardly keep up, right? So 60s and 70s, and the stagflation that was happening, and the cities were burning, and the fire departments were just trying to keep their heads above water, right? And they weren't thinking about the research and development and things like that. And then on the heels of that comes all these new mandates: EMS, hazardous materials, public education, all these other things start getting piled up on top of that core mission. And you're so busy trying to adapt to that and implement that you, again, start paying less and less attention to that core mission. And to the point of this part of the discussion, the science and the engineering that underpins that core mission. I always like to say, when I was making presentations, they called it Fire Engineering Magazine for a reason, right? It used to be the Fireman's Journal, and they very deliberately in the 1940s changed the name to Fire Engineering because they wanted it to reflect the reality of the American Fire Service, right? It's becoming more engineering based, more science based, all that kind of stuff. And they wanted to reflect that. So it has been part of our history and our culture off and on for decades, for generations. And I think the generation that we're most familiar with is always ours and the one or two preceding ours, right? And in those generations, it got lost for a while. And I think UL has helped us bring that back, right? Is that there is a science and an engineering that underpins our core profession, and we need to be versed in it if we're going to be good at what we do. And they're giving us the ability to do that. So it really has very little to do with whether or not you open up the nozzle from inside the building first or outside the building first. And they couldn't give, I don't know anybody at UL gives a rat's ass which you do or when. That's not what they're about. That's not what they're trying to do. They want to give you the information you need, really good information, raw data, raw information, distilled in a way that it can be digested, but still fundamental information that you can actually use and apply to make better decisions on the fire ground. That's the mission. That's the goal. And I think they're doing an exceptionally good job. And now they've become so successful, UL FSRI, that part of UL, is that they've taken on a much broader mission now as well that many of us probably don't pay a whole lot of attention to. But the whole, the like close before you doze, the whole public service aspect of it, right? I mean, the idea is that you got to make the world more fire safe, and how do you go about doing that? So they're expanding, into those areas as well, more so. My little piece of it was trying to translate as best I could to somebody who didn't have the time or inclination to pay as close attention to it as I would or somebody else might. We all want. I remember very early on, guys would say, I don't need to know all that. I just need to know, tell me what I really need to know. Don't give me all that, fancy smancy stuff. And I said, no, you really need to know this. You really need to know. It's not, it's fire science. It's not rocket science. It's not physics. It's really pretty simple, basic stuff, right? If you got the smarts to get that paramedic license, you got the smarts to understand anything you need to understand coming out of UL. It's not beyond your ability whatsoever. So.
What's been interesting from the human part is, like, for example, going back to the shifts, people will say, well, we need to see data. And I've started to realize, well, where is that line? of just simple common sense. So let me get this straight. You want someone to do a longitudinal study if a 42-hour work week is healthier than a 56-hour work week. And then I look at, the absence of study, because people are like, is there data? I'm like, no. And that's another good question, isn't it? Why are we not studying the thing that's killing firefighters the most? We're ignoring it completely. So what I realize is that firstly, we've done a terrible job of educating the researchers on what needs to actually be studied on the human side I'm talking about now. But secondly, where I see people asking for data a lot of times is just so they can avoid making a decision. Well, I need to see study. No, you don't need to see a study. You're living the study. Locally here, you have had 5 suicides, and now you just had 4 firefighters arrested for hazing. There is no more study needed, for fuck's sake. You know what I mean? What you're doing is not working. You need to make a change, period. So I think this is the problem with the science world, and we saw it during COVID and some other areas, is it's become very convoluted. And the areas that absolutely need science behind them and need studies are getting washed away from all these calls for studies where they simply aren't needed. There's things that intuitively are a truth, and we need to do no studies whatsoever. And then, as you alluded to, there are areas, especially debunking fire service myths, where we need to lean back into the science again.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think and what I hope will come from this is that maybe the example that UL has set over the last dozen years or so starts to permeate into the more human aspects and those sort of things, because both Kerber and Majorkowski will tell you at a drop of a hat, this work has always actually been done. This kind of research, there's been research like this done. It wasn't anything that we invented. But it wasn't being used. It'd get published in some arcane journal somewhere, put on a shelf, and nobody did anything with it, right? What you all did differently was the whole, how do we make this implementable? How do we get this to the fire service in a way? How do you get the science to the street so that they can be used? And I think that example might be useful in these other aspects, right? As you said, the work has already been done. It'd be nice if we did a more modern one or whatever. There's nuances to that. But to your point, the fundamental work has already been done. We know what, but how do we get it in a usable form to the fire service so that they'll take action on it? Because I think that's part of the example that UL has given us is how do you make this stuff actionable? And a piece of it is you put firefighters on your research panels. And so you make it very much, involve them quite literally in the process. And they become, not only do they become your spokespeople, but you all, over the course of the years, has done a lot of things very differently because the firefighters were there saying, no, wait a minute, that's not what we need, or that's not what we mean, or that's not what we want to look at. And so they, shifted gears to accommodate that. And it's paid dividends, paid really big dividends, I think. And perhaps that's something that we need in these other areas as well, is this more direct involvement of the fire service in the research that is being done, or in some, something like that. I don't know. And that puts me back personally to the international. And just in case there's some, like Sean, my buddy, old Sean, and a few others, there are people within the international that are very much on board with all of this and want to see it happen, right? So it's not like they're, not engaged at all. But I don't think the tipping point has happened just yet.
I want to go to some, the highlights of your career, but just before we do, while we're on this topic, I mean, you talked about innovation from the 50s, for example, that was then rebuked, that, it sounded like it was very effective. We get the tarps over the car fires. People are, I would never do that. But you see the demos and they seem to work really well with zero water. So if you were king for a day, removing all the egos and all the things that we've discussed today, with the science and the history and all these other elements and the innovation that you've seen from around the world, what would be some of the tactics, innovations that you would bring to the American Fire Service, nationally, that would help elevate us?
That's asking a lot. I think we've talked a lot about them. I would, and the helmet is the representative example. But I think just this whole idea that we don't wear our traditions into battle. We should be wearing, um, our gear should reflect the best state of the art that's available right now. And I think a means to that is, you know, a soldier that typically doesn't have any gear with his name on it, right? You're issued stuff, and then you give that back. And I don't know that we really need gear with our name on it, kind of thing. And that might be part of how you fix that, right? Is that you get your gear is sized for you, but it's there, for you to use on that shift, and then it goes and gets cleaned or whatever. And it might not be the exact same helmet that comes back to you, but it's what you actually need to do your job. Um, so I think that the idea that the gear should reflect the mission and not the traditions of the fire service would be one that I would spend my time on. Physical fitness is the other one, and I came to this very late. I gotta be honest. I smoked. I smoked like a chimney until I was almost 50. So I was not, by definition, I was not fit. If you're a smoker, you're not fit. Um, but the fitness, I mean, I would ban the use of tobacco and vaping in the fire service if I could. I mean, that would be cause of dismissal. That is just so, you know patently not good, not good for you, not good for your mission. You can't, like, again, to your point, if it's all about them, then you shouldn't be using tobacco, right? Because you can't do both at the same time. You can't be a high performing firefighter and use tobacco at the same time. So that would probably be my lead on the whole health and fitness thing. And there would be actual physical fitness standards. If I could wave a magic wand, you would have to do whatever it is. I'm not the expert on, so but represented, you got to do so many push-ups or pull-ups or whatever. Come on, we know, there's no mystery here. You're either physically capable or you're not, and you have to maintain that throughout your career. I think those would be the big things if we could, because I think the other ones are more easily digestible, or we've made enough inroads in a lot of other things, but we're still struggling with the truly fit, the mental and physical fitness, and actually having hard parameters that we adhere to, and the gear, there's still a lot of resistance with like the whole smooth bore debate and those sorts of things. Like we do it, that we do it this way, kind of thing. And the other thing that I would do. Is that there'd be more regional fire services than there are. I mean, California sort of kind of does it. You were out there, so you would understand it better. But the whole Cal Fire thing, to me, kind of makes sense. I don't know if it works the way I think it works, but it kind of makes sense. My experience late in my career in Northern Illinois was there are a lot of fire departments that would consolidate if they could, but there's actually legalities that get in their way. The state makes it more difficult for them to do it. But they would like to do it because operationally it would make sense for them. But the parochialism within the state, the legislature is just, it makes it too hard to do. So I think consolidation would be good for parts of the American Fire Service. And find a way to facilitate that, not shove it down anybody's throat, but the places that want to consolidate and be more regional, let them do it. Because where it does happen, it seems to be pretty successful.
With fitness standards, with you having, your father's career and your career, it's always blown my mind because I didn't come into the fire service till my first job was 2004. But we were held to a very high standard in the fire academy, and then orientation at Hialeah. I guess that class is still revered to this day because they had a lot of time to kick our ass while the non-certs went through all their training. But the point being, the bar was set high at the front door. So in my generation, at least, none of us can turn around and go, oh, it's not fair for a fitness standard, when you knew exactly what was expected of you in fire academy. You had to don gear, throw hose and extra cylinders on your back and climb stairs and drag dummies and all the things. And yet, when I speak to the ocean lifeguards, it blows their mind that we don't have. You speak to the, special forces, special operations.
Yeah,
They had no idea
yeah,
that police and fire had no fitness standards. So,
right.
where has that resistance come from, and how do we turn that around? Because it's not only the performance. Obviously, if you're opposing fitness standards, you're basically promoting disease in the fire service.
Yeah, it comes from two places. Depending on where you're located and how big your fire department is, right? So one place is in the truly rural and the smaller town fire departments is where am I going to get people if they have to meet these standards, I'll have nobody. I have next to nobody now, and if they have to meet these standards, I'll have nobody at all. So that's part of it, and that's a legitimate question that needs to be addressed. And then the other part is some misguided ideas from the union again, right? They're protecting jobs. They don't want guys to lose their jobs. To which I think the answer is really simple. From here on, right? Go ahead. No, we're not going to affect anybody right now, but from here on, we got. It's someday we just have to say from now on, starting with the next class, this is the way it's going to be. And if you had done that, right, during the course of my career, the job is turned over 3 or 4 times, right? You had 3 or 4 opportunities, and you can actually see it coming when you look at the demographics within your job. And if any, fire department looks at where their age is, you know when you're going to turn over a lot of people, right? You can just from their ages, and you can say, okay, here's where we want to implement this, right? Because this is where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck, because we're going to start turning a whole lot of people over, and we'll have it all done in 5 years, or mostly done, whatever. So it'd be easy to predict when your best time is, right? So just do it, and you don't even have to take the full giant leap right away. You just have to start with, some kind of standard that's actually a standard, there's all kinds of fire departments that will basically, or I should say their administrations, or their municipalities will lie to you and say that they have physical standards, but they don't. All you have to do is look at their rank and file, and you see that those people aren't meeting any physical standards. So, yeah, that's I don't know. Does that answer your question? No, it's so frustrating, And I really think the upside of this perhaps is that fitness has become a thing again in this country, and wellness has become. People are genuinely interested in this. There's a younger generation that's genuinely interested. It may be misguided in some respects, but that's beside the point. They are genuinely interested in how do I maximize my health and well-being. Right? We're talking about things about not lifespan but health span. You hear that more and more frequently, right? So now that this has become part of the more the broader discussion in society, this is the time to jump on this stuff.
Absolutely. I've heard a lot of people, you hear this ignorant statement from a lot of people, oh, well, the problem is, we have a recruitment crisis because kids these days don't want to work, which is absolute bullshit. Kids these days, as you said, are looking at the fire service for what it really is. Because when I came on, I'm sure it was nothing when you were available, but I had the internet, but it was just, smoky faces and saving babies was always out there, and how to ace your interview. That was it. So, and it was post 9/11, Ladder 49 just came out. It was all guts and glory. And, no one was asking, well, is this bad for us? Well, now you Google it, and the good news, if you Google, is a 24/72 a healthy shift? Now Google tells you how great it is, which is amazing. That shows you that we've put enough information out now. But if you Google, is firefighting healthy, it will show you all the bad stuff. Now, it's not negating all the good stuff. This is why, we're still talking about it now, and neither of us are wearing uniform anymore because we adore this profession. But we have to, address the bad things. So these young candidates are looking at that going, well, I could be a welder and make a lot of money and be home, every night with my family.
And I can get up and go. With my 10 years of welding experience, if I want to get up and transport my family across the country, I can do that and get a job as a welder with 10 years of experience somewhere. That's going to mean something to somebody. And in a lot of the fire service, that means nothing. Right. So that's another thing I think that scares guys away. We don't have portability within our profession, and we need to do something about that. It would benefit everybody a great deal.
100%. Well, this is what's kind of begun now is because we have this 24/72 and people are like, wow, I want to go, for example, work in Florida. They're not
Yeah,
only, a well-paid department and, a lot of calls, but now they've got this healthier work week. So reciprocity has become, more of a conversation because it's insane. I can, as a paramedic, I can, my national registry, I can challenge California's test, which I actually did. I was trying to go back years ago now. And, and then, all right, I'm a state California medic again. But you're telling me that the way I pull a cross lay, I have to go back to school in, Texas to be able to pull it. It's insanity when we talk about it. And like you said, the arrogance of, well, this is the way we do it. Bullshit. If you've been a firefighter for 10 years somewhere else, there's a lot of value to the way you did it there. And I don't walk through the door telling us how great your last department was the whole time. But there's probably a lot of things that you did there that we could learn from in our department. So, you'd break down these silos, I think, if you had a lot more reciprocity across the country.
Yeah. It would help. And I think it would help the recruitment issue a great deal. If guys knew that there was some portability to their job. Because I think that it's especially for the smaller departments. Like when I was out in Algonquin, we lost a lot of guys that would come on because they would take tests, throughout. And as soon as a department with better prospects, they had an opening, they would move. And so I think that's the fear in a lot of departments. I'll keep losing people to the bigger departments with bigger paychecks and all that. But that's not necessarily the case, because if we have the reciprocity, then I can go milking other departments as well. I don't have to, look for guys, give them an entrance exam and put them through a recruit school and, take some of that away. If I could hire guys that have already been trained and certified and bring them right on board with a month's worth of orientation or whatever, that would benefit everybody. I think we'd all be better off. And you could go after the fit firefighters and
Yeah. Well, that's what I was kind of alluding to at the beginning, is that with this whole kids today don't want to work, actually, I'm hearing that a lot of departments are saying our young fit recruits are really fitter than they've ever been, because they've grown up in this area of CrossFit and, understanding physical therapy and sports massage and all these things. So they're getting great candidates. And what you were talking about with the lack of retention, this is where the money is for the 24/72. If you look at the overtime, you look at the money lost of you just trained and equipped a firefighter and paid into their pension, and then 2 years later they left after medic school, that's tens of thousands of dollars that just walked out your door. So, but people look at this like, well, now you're trying to take our firefighters. Like, no, the rising tide lifts all ships. When I was testing 22 years ago in California, it was against thousands of people, and there were 30 jobs available, 30. That's it. Yeah. So actually, I kind of broke it down because we usually lost 25% of every higher class through attrition because the bar was set so high. My class was technically the top 1% of the list. So that's how competitive it was to be a firefighter. Yeah. And that's, up till only 10-ish years ago. So the money is all being wasted downstream. You front load it, you open reciprocity, you put in fitness standards, you're going to attract the right kind of person. It's like, oh, you got a fitness standard? Even better. Challenge accepted.
They'll self-select, I think, I mean, all kinds of industries and professions have proven that. You raise your standard, you get more and better recruits. Dropping your standards doesn't do you any good. Never has.
No. Well, one more area that I want to get to, the transition and, do some closing questions. You've got a very long story career in all these different ranks, from firefighter all the way through to chief. When you reflect back now, what were some of the career calls that you had? And it can be obviously, some of the big fires, but also it might just be moments of kindness and compassion that you remember.
It's funny that the two that always come to mind first, and it's actually three, were EMS calls. And one was just a really good save on like a 13-year-old autistic kid. Which is all, we find out later, right? But a kid with a lot of physical and mental disabilities. That was an arrest, right? And we had a save, which you don't see so very often, especially back then. and it just was one of those, you were certain it was just going to go to be bad all the way around. The parents are right there to, it was just, this is just going to be another one of these. And it wasn't another one of those. It was just the outcome. And the response of the family afterwards to the firefighters that worked the call and all that was as appropriate as it could possibly be. And it just, I just don't ever forget that one. It was 20 years ago or more. I never forget that. And the other one is very similar to that, but on the flip side, one of the most tragic, I had two crib deaths within a week of each other. And it was almost like deja vu. The second one was almost like step by step identical to the first one. Same neighborhood, same kind of apartment, basement apartment, Hispanic families, same, it was just eerie how close they were. And in both of those cases, in one case, the difference was in one case, the kid might have been viable, and the other one, the kid was already stiff. So, it was just like one of those, and it's help me, help my baby, can do something. And it's, you're holding this stiff, body, and you're like, oh God. And those are those kind of things that just never leave you. Right. And so, I tell that story. I'm still working that one out, right? Obviously, because I bring it up all the time. But I bring it up as the example of, because I tell, especially if I'm addressing recruits or young firefighters, is don't let anybody ever tell you that you'll get used to it or that it gets easier, because it doesn't. It gets worse. It doesn't get better. It doesn't get easier. It gets worse, because they accumulate. They pile on top of one another. And that's how this job is going to kill you, And, you think that if you die in this job, you're going to die some dramatic, heroic death, but you're not. The job is going to kill you. You're going to be you're going to be retired or on disability or whatever, at home alone, whatever, and die of suicide or a heart attack or a stroke, or that's how the job's going to kill you. And it's these incidents, these cumulative things that you don't pay enough attention to, that are going to do it. And that's why those stuck with me, because especially the crib death ones came about at about the same time that I'm hitting my stride with the whole UL thing and the teach. I was doing a lot of teaching and a lot of, presenting and stuff like that. So I had, fortunately, this opportunity to talk about it a lot and process through it. But that's when a lot of that stuff really hit home for me, is that it's those incidents that don't, the other one that comes to mind, and this is not so much incidents, but a guy that I knew pretty well. I can't say that he was a good friend of mine, but I knew him pretty well on the job. Committed suicide right before I left. And so we're talking about this, amongst the group around us, at the office. And anyway, it came about that in the last, I think it was the last 2 years or whatever, from this guy, previous to 7 guys that we knew, anyway, 7 guys that we all knew pretty well had killed themselves in this short period of time, right? That we knew of, right? This isn't even counting the ones that are ambiguous. But these were, active members that had killed themselves in a 2-year period, 7 guys. And that, again, was one of those, oh my God, what are we missing here? How can this be that this is going on like this? So those are the things, those are the things that stick, right? To me, and I could come up with a couple other success ones, that, you've got to grab. First off, I think that the lesson is that you've got to understand the impact that these things are having on you throughout your career. You can't dismiss them. They're going to accumulate, right? It's one, and I know I'm bouncing all over the place here, but this whole idea of post-traumatic stress disorder, right? We are all going to have post-traumatic stress. Whether or not it turns into a disorder is in a large degree up to us. What do we do with that post-traumatic stress? And I don't think that we're good enough yet at telling the fire service, this is part of what you have to train and educate your people about, is you're going to have this. This is going to happen to you. You're going to have this traumatic stress that you're going to have to deal with. So start now. Don't wait for it to turn into a disorder, because then it becomes problematic, right? You can live with post-traumatic stress. Living with a disorder is a little bit different thing. So I wish I had learned that lesson a little bit sooner. So that's, obviously that wasn't something that um, was we paid much attention to during most of my career. Um, but then the saving grace, I think, of the career um, was that, and I could I'm gonna forget names and locations until I start on one, and then I might go on. But there are places that I worked in Chicago, and even in Algonquin there was one, a guy who, where the firefighters had saved his great grandfather or something like that, right? And he still came by the family. Somebody from the family still came by the firehouse every year on the anniversary to bring a cake and whatever like that. And I had a couple of those experiences in Chicago too. One was up at Engine 108, where I was never assigned, but I relieved in that area for a while, and I experienced it there. And another one was at Engine 23, where I did work. I was the captain there, and a family where we had done something for them decades ago, but they still came by on a regular basis to thank the firefighters. And those sort of things really stick. I'm not really good at remembering incidents. I really am terrible about that kind of stuff. People, what's the worst fire you ever went to? I don't know. Probably the first one and the last one. I don't know. But those personal, especially when there was family. And another one that sticks, and this is almost going to be stupid, but so I'm out on the west side, battalion chief, 14th Battalion. And a neighbor of mine where I'm living works for Coca-Cola or something. They're having some kind of raffle through his job, right? Where they, silent raffle or something like that. And he wants to, I don't know where he heard about this, but he wants to raffle off dinner at the firehouse as part of the raffle. And he's, he knows me and he doesn't know any other firefighter. And I don't. I was like, yeah, fine. I don't care. We'll do that. We have people over all the time. I talk to guys at the firehouse first, and yeah, that's cool, whatever. Anyway, whoever wins it, they, the two families came, and these guys at Engine 38's house, they made pizza once a week, usually on Saturdays. They, from scratch dough, the whole 9 yards, right? And it'd be literally the whole shit show with everybody covered in flour and the whole thing. But they'd make a week's worth of pizza. Anyway, we get these families to come in with their kids, and they're all at the perfect age, 10 through 14 or whatever. And they're all making the pizza with the firefighters, right? And just couldn't have had a better time. People, nobody ever met. They had no clue. They weren't even from the city. They had just won this silly thing. But that just, for me, personified this whole, when we talk about service to the community and what this is supposed to mean and all that, that was the personification of all of it. Because this is West Side ghetto. These are not the firefighters you would expect, from the stereotype, or the firehouse where you would expect this to take place from the stereotypes. But there it was, and they were all having a blast. And yeah, it was great. It was fun to watch.
I wrote, actually in both of my books, about the back to bed calls. And I've always said, when people ask me, what are some of the highlights of your career? Sometimes it was just a truck company going to, an elderly couple. The wife's, for example, has fallen out the bed. Maybe she soiled herself. And you've got this man that was probably very strong and able, now just crushed because he's unable to pick the love of his life off the floor and put her back to bed.
Yeah.
So the four of us go there, we clean her up, we put her in fresh clothes, we put her back to bed, we obviously check her medically, and then we go back to the station. But you don't see that again, as we were talking, that projection of, well, I'm an American hero firefighter, that it is that kindness and compassion. That's tradition in the fire service. And I always look back and yeah, of course, cutting a roof, 4 stories up, after being awake for all of 4 minutes before, yeah, that's pretty good. Going interior on a barn burner, yeah, absolutely. But it's those moments of kindness and compassion that always stuck out with me. And I think that sometimes we forget that when we're talking about what we do. It's always, like you said, duck walking and S patterns. But what about just simply putting someone back to bed? That's as if not more important.
Oh, absolutely. And we had one. We'll probably do that. We could do this all day now. We'll each remember one, right? And this is probably not all that unique, but the guys in Algonquin, they had a heart attack. The guy had a heart attack cutting his grass. Tradition, plain simple. They went back and finished the lawn after they got him to the hospital. They, went back and cut the rest of the grass and cleaned everything up and put everything away, and that sort of stuff. And anybody really can work a code. I mean, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people that can work a code. Not everybody has the presence of mind to do something like that spontaneously, and that firefighters do that. Not too many other people.
Absolutely.
And if we don't tell those stories, then we don't make that part of who and what we are, and the tradition won't continue. So I think that's why I like to tell those kinds of stories, because that's how you make sure that it happens again, is you tell the story.
100%. Well, you alluded to some of the calls that that do haunt you, and the PD calls are definitely some of the worst ones in my mind too. When you reflect back now, what, if any, were the darkest places that you got to, and then what are some of the tools you've used to get yourself back into a good mental state again?
So strange as this may seem, the worst came for me when at the very end of my career, when I was fire chief, and I had to fire people. I was never in a position that you actually had that responsibility, right? And I had to let some people go, and so that was hard, right? That and to this day, I don't. You wonder about some of them, and one in particular. So Josh was a firefighter paramedic with us, and try to do the short version of the story because it can get kind of long. But anyway, I get a visit from a cop that says we need to interview this guy, and he says he works a side job at a hospital in the emergency room, and they're missing some drugs at the emergency room. So we're talking to everybody that works there. So I got to talk to your guy. Okay, fine. So we talked to the guy. Nothing happens. I don't hear anything about it. And Josh comes to me afterwards and said, I swear to God, not me, nothing to do. I'm not even going to work there anymore. That place is crazy, blah, blah, blah. He leaves. And he does. He quits working there, eventually goes work some other hospital. Anyway, they wind up missing drugs. They got him on film, right? So within a year, this all happens. And then they revoke his license. Well, suspend his license. Once they suspend his license, by law, I can't employ him anymore. That's the way it worked in that part of the world. So I start having to process his dismissal. Now, the first thing we did, and this was one of the silver linings, so to speak. But in the process of this, before I found out that. I found out that they caught him the second time from the union president, who called me and trusted me enough to call me and said, what can we do for this guy? Right. And I said, well, what you got to do is you got to get him in a resident program. Right. And then at least for 30 days, I can't touch him. Nothing I can do. He's in a resident program that buys you 30 days to figure out what to do next, which he did. I helped him find a program they could get him. And so we were able to do that for him. And he did get clean for a while. But what makes this story the story I got to tell is that Josh killed himself eventually, or OD'd, one of the two. Not really sure which it was. But he didn't win, right? The drugs won, the fentanyl won. And so that, having made that decision and living with that decision, is the hardest thing I ever did. So, because you're always, well, what if I hadn't fired him? What if I had, given him a second chance? There's all the what ifs, and intellectually, I know that I'm okay. that I was within my bounds and I was doing what I had to do, and blah 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 blah. But I still fired the guy, and he still killed himself. So. that don't go away, and you can't expect it to, right? You have to just find a place to put it and manage it.
How long had Josh worked in the fire service?
He was probably, 10 years maybe. He was a vet. He had spent a little bit of time in the Air Force, I think it was. Had done some tours. He was still in the reserves, so he would still do his reserve work. And then one of the things that we found is after all this, right, is through the family, was that he had struggled with this from the time he was a teenager. Right, the combination of depression / drugs, and the details I never got, but they did come and say, he's been fighting this demon since he was a teenager. So we knew that it wasn't, just a recent sort of thing or whatever. And in a way that made me feel a little better, right? It wasn't like, this was a lifelong struggle, that we got tied up. It wasn't something that happened because of the job, just because of the job or the military service.
This is a conversation I've had a lot more recently since, I've been a student now for 9 years, listening to so many, live stories and experts. But when you look at it, most of us that join the fire service have had some things happen when we were younger that drove us into this profession, that we wanted to serve. We wanted to be there on people's worst day. We didn't want people to feel the way that we felt when we were younger, whatever the subconscious things are. Yeah. And so having that conversation at the front door, acknowledging that and saying, look, if you've towed the line here, there's a good chance that you've been through some shit before this, and that's okay. But if we bury it down and don't talk about it, that becomes a fracture to your foundation, or an addiction that we didn't see and that's still going on. I lost a classmate at my last department to an opioid overdose, same exact thing. Yeah. But if we have that conversation saying, but if we address it, if we talk about it the same way as we're going to PT you for the next X amount of weeks, and we're going to test you for the next year on probation on all your operational skills, we're gonna have X amount of therapy sessions, and we're going to turn some of those struggles into strengths. I think we would make such a huge dent, coupled with obviously rest and recovery, in this mental health side, because the reason why you put the uniform on, there's a high chance that you're carrying some stuff in. And so we don't go, well, that's where he was an addict when he was young, so that's why I did it. No, you're the responsibility of us now as a profession, so how do we mitigate whatever we brought in the front door and create that post-traumatic growth and help them overcome, whatever it is they're struggling with? Because now, as we sit here in 2025, ibogaine, ayahuasca, even if other talk therapy hadn't worked, we have plant medicine options that are making, incredible successes in the addiction world now. So I think this is, the moral injury that you have with Josh and that feeling of, not being able to do enough, or was that a ripple effect that caused him to take his life or overdose? Turning that around, because we didn't know about that stuff back then. We couldn't have these conversations, but we can today. And just like we're talking about the resistance to innovation, the fire service, EMS, law enforcement, we need to look at this and go, you're standing in front of me and there's probably a good chance that you've had X. So let's start working through that now, because then you become stronger. You become more empathetic. You'll be able to relate to people on the street because you were there. You were an addict. You did grow up around domestic violence, whatever it is. But if we push it down and ignore it and just box check some psych test at the front door, we're never going to address these things. So I think Josh's story is an opportunity to really have these conversations of how can we do it better this next generation. Yeah.
I think we need to, in some respects, you need to start with, we're all damaged goods, and just start with that assumption and say, well, okay, look, we're all damaged goods, and let's identify, where you hurt and what we need to pay attention to, right? So we can do it right from the beginning and excuse me, make sure we're not contributing to the issue. Because all these things are going to happen. The stuff that happens on the job is going to happen. There's no preventing any of that. So, I think, the one that always rubbed me the wrong way was the "don't worry, you'll get used to it, kid." That was the wrong answer.
Yeah.
At least I never got used to it. I don't know.
I had an interesting thing happen about 2 years ago now. I was on a flight back from England. I've been taking care of my dad after knee surgery. And we're on the tarmac, doors are closed, we're about to push off. And I got those noise canceling headphones on, and I'm looking forward, and it's a 747, so whatever it is, like 10 seats wide. And I see commotion in front of me, that people are looking behind. So I pull the headphones off and look back, and one of the passengers, the last guy that came on, basically just keeled over in the aisle. And I always kind of joke, because you hear these stories of, well, there were 10 cardiologists on the way back from a convention. Right? No,
Yeah.
not on this flight. I was the only one that had
Yeah.
any kind of emergency medicine experience. And there was some good Samaritans all around. The cabin crew were phenomenal. But as far as a team of medics, for example, that could work together, or ER physicians, there was none of that. So end up working the code. Very long story short, it goes on. The fire come originally, then the London paramedics come on, and I'm working them in the galley now. And then finally, I said, look, you guys good? I'm gonna, get out the way so that you can work. Go to the toilet on the plane, wash the blood off my hands, and then go sit down. Very different than if I'd run a call with my crew. And it kind of hit me, and I was like, why do I feel so weird after 14 years of doing codes and hundreds and hundreds of people? And I was a zero code save guy, so everyone fucking died when I was working the code. But what I realized after is like, oh shit, this is how you're supposed to feel when someone dies. And you realize, so it's not that you get used to it, you just push it down, you just ignore all those feelings, but they're still in there. So now I think that was 5 years after taking the uniform off. I'm working this code. I sit down. There's no off gassing. No one else around can really relate like we would in the back of a rescue or an ER desk. And and it was so jarring. And I was able to talk to the cabin crew and kind of help them kind of debrief a little bit, and it was great. But for the first time, I realized that this is how it's supposed to feel when someone dies in front of you. But we do get and we don't get used to it. Like you said, we become numb to it. Those are two very, very different things.
Yep.
All right. Well, I want to kind of round off. So just before we go to the closing questions, what was it that made you finally pull the trigger to transition out? And we know that a lot of our men and women do struggle when they transition, that loss of tribe, purpose, identity, etc. What was that transition like for you specifically?
So I got lucky, I think, because I retired in degrees. I left Chicago, but I didn't leave the fire service. And so I did. That was the bulk of my career, and that's where I still identify most with. If somebody asks, I say I was a Chicago firefighter, obviously. And but then I could do this other thing that I really never expected to do. That whole administrative fire chief thing was never on my radar screen. That was nothing I could ever think of in Chicago. And then when I left there, I could leave on my own terms, and I left there largely because I was spending so much time with the lecturing and the presentations and stuff with UL that I wasn't really attending to my job. And they were very good about letting me go when I needed to go and all that kind of stuff. But like I said before, with the whole 40-year thing, I had sort of mentally prepared myself for leaving at that time. But even once I left Algonquin, so April 1st, 2019, I'm done. I don't put on a uniform anymore. But I'm still involved with Underwriters Labs and the work that they're doing and doing classes, presenting that information stuff. So I'm staying in touch with the fire service still for a couple more years. I still got my foot in it and all that. And then probably 3 years ago, between 2 and 3 years ago, I just kind of wound that down. I just kind of got to where, okay, I'm not, when I decided I wanted to start traveling full time. And so leading into the Appalachian Trail thing, so that was 2023 was the prep when we hiked it. So the year before that was the prep. And so that ate up a whole lot of time. And of course, once you're on the trail, you're on the trail. We were on the trail for 5 months. The plan was 6. So by that time, I had pulled myself away pretty much 100%. And then I had done maybe 1 or 2 things. So the short story is I retired, in pieces. I didn't just have a day, well, boom, I'm not doing this anymore. So that I, think helped me a whole lot, right? And if you are in a position where you can plan that out a little bit in some way, shape, or form, I would encourage guys to do that. If there are things that you can do that involve, like you see a lot of guys, it's more common out east, New York in particular, where they're volunteers wherever it is they live, because they tend to go from New York City to volunteer right away. And they'll stay in the volunteer service, for a while after they retire. And if you can do that, I think those things make sense. Um, there's any number of retirement communities that are like 90% firemen, I think, or at least Chicago has that. They all follow each other to Arizona or Florida, wherever they're going, so they keep in touch that way. So all those sorts of things make sense to me. But so I got lucky in that respect. And then the other thing and I'm not sure how I came to this, and I think maybe my dad, just by example. Firefighting was what he did. It wasn't who he was. He was proud of what he did, and he identified with it. And most of his friends, his best friend in the world, lived 2 doors down from him when he died, and he was a firefighter as well. They worked together for decades. But I never got a sense that that's who he was, right? He didn't, at family gatherings, he didn't tell fire stories. He didn't, he had many friends outside the fire service. So I think you got to be cautious about your entire identity being this, I'm a fireman kind of thing, and you got to be somebody else besides that. I see guys, and this is a personal thing, just because I don't know that it's widespread, but this was just something I experienced out in Algonquin, events that we would do in the community, and the local VFW post, and you see these guys at parades and stuff that were Vietnam vets, and still put on their uniforms at these events and stuff like that. And I just got a sense with a couple of them with that was the last important thing that they did in their life, right? They still kind of are still living with that, because you got this sense that they didn't feel that they accomplished much after that, or didn't do anything of import after that. And that struck me as just kind of sad. I was glad that they still had a place to be that, and to be proud of what they did and to get the recognition. But it was also sad to see that, just the situation that they appeared to be in. And I think there's just concrete steps that any of us can take to make sure that doesn't happen to us. Have some interests, have something besides golf, outside the fire service. Be somebody besides a firefighter. I think is important. It was to me. Excuse me. So I think that helps a whole lot. Makes a whole lot of sense.
When you were hiking the Appalachian Trail, I would imagine there was a lot of quiet time. Did you notice your mind start to quieten over time as you were, removing all the input, the inputs and all the stresses of, decades in the fire service?
I don't know if I was ever that aware of it. In hindsight, I'd say it happened. But at the moment, because the other thing for me anyway, it was hiking, doing a long distance hike like that. First off, I'd never done anything remotely like that. So many people that do the AT or one of those other ones, this is what they do, right? They're big backpackers, hikers, and this, we just jumped into this thing. Oh, maybe we'll do this. We went down to Ocala and did a 5-day hike down Ocala to prepare, and we walked around with backpacks a whole lot, and then we got on the Appalachian Trail and took off. So it was physically very, very demanding. So it wasn't so much tranquil in that respect. I was working very hard much of the day to keep up with this woman in front of me who could just hike forever, it seemed like. But I get where you're coming from. And I think my life in general since then there's been a lot of that. Right. And it's part of why I like doing what I'm doing is that I don't have to be anywhere. I don't, I have a whole lot of control over who I'm with and what surrounds me and all that sort of stuff. And the state of mind that I'm in is like 100% under my control. I'm not responding to, buttons being pushed kind of thing. Right. So, and I guess that's any of us, right? I mean, that's what the whole, like people do what they do, the golfing or the fishing. I got a brother-in-law that's a retired fireman as well, and he's a big fisherman, and that's his happy place. I mean, he will fish all day long, every single day, um, and and loves it, absolutely loves it. And I couldn't imagine doing that at all. But yeah, for me, being in the woods and walking is kind of like his fishing. That's just having it. And I was in the Scouts when I was a kid, and the whole outdoors thing I was always had. And that's the kind of vacations we took, because when you got 9 kids, you're not staying in hotels, you're staying in tents, and so that was a part of my growing up, being out in the woods and that whole getting away from it all kind of thing. And so coming back to that in my retirement has been really good for me. I really enjoy it. Just, being away from people and dogs. And yeah, not alone, but, controlling my environment means a lot to me. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, for people listening, if they wanted to reach out to you, do you have any places on social media or emails for people to contact you, even though you're going to be on a ship now for half a year?
Yeah, Pete Van Dorpe at gmail.com. And you can post that up or whatever. That's fine. I probably won't get back to you for 7 months. But yeah, we don't. We actually, because I shouldn't say we. Lisa did all the work. When we were hiking the trail, we got a YouTube channel, and we tried to put up periodically, what we did every day, kind of thing. And that's a lot of work. You obviously know you do this, but it's more work than either one of us ever wanted to do again. It in some ways, we originally did it just to keep. The idea was it'd be less work than answering people's texts all the time. We just wanted it for friends and family, right? But actually, the people that engaged us the most turned out to be total strangers. So that becomes a little bit more of a stress kind of thing, because you're trying to entertain them now or whatever. So we're never going to do that again. That's not. So there's no social media of Pete and Lisa on their travels, which many people do, but it's not for us. I don't think we tried it, and it just wasn't what we wanted. So, but yeah, if anybody wants to reach out to me, I'd be happy to speak with anyone.
Brilliant. Well, Pete, I want to thank you. It's been such an incredible conversation. We've been all over the place, but I mean, hearing some of your perspectives coming from, the lineage that you have and the positions that you held, I think it's invaluable, especially for, a lot of the younger firefighters out there listening and maybe debunking some of the myths that they've been taught early in their career. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's as much as I like to say, I'm retired with a capital R, and, but to like one of our last points here, right? How do you manage this whole separating from this thing that was so much a part of your life? And this is one of the ways you manage that, is you never completely separate, right? So you've given me an opportunity to reconnect with what was such a big part of my life for so long. And I'm grateful to you for that. So thank you.